Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we wanted to talk a little about pesticide labels and using products according to what the label says.
Well, you know, for farmers to do pesticide application on their farm, they have to be licensed to do so. They have to have a private pesticide applicator license, and part of that agreement is you're going to follow the label with the products you're using.
Right. So what we have always said is the label is the law. Now, it doesn't matter if necessarily you could use some product. If you're going to make an application that is against the product label, well, you can't do that. Let me just give you a quick example. Atrazine. Atrazine is labeled on corn from the time it is emerging, actually pre-emerge even, until the time the corn is 12 inches tall. Now, if you go out and spray atrazine on big corn, is it going to hurt anything, Darren?
No.
Is it going to leave a whole bunch of residue in the crop later?
I certainly don't expect so.
No. So are there really any problems with spraying atrazine after it's 12 inches tall in corn?
Other than it not being on the label?
Exactly.
And you know, you think about that. Well, why is that then? Why on their label do they say, well, 12 inches is the maximum height? It was a compromise made. Back when the EPA was reviewing atrazine, they were looking for ways to reduce the amount of atrazine being used in the country. And that was one of the concessions that was made by a chemical company that, all right, well, how about we just spray it before 12 inches tall so we don't do any late season applications? And the EPA said, that's a good idea. But you know, you think about that. Late season, there's all these big plants that are going to take in the atrazine and all these huge root systems in cornfields that are going to take in the atrazine. So there's not going to be any atrazine that makes it to groundwater or gets away. I mean, obviously there could be minuscule amounts. I'm not saying there could never be one tiny little drop of it. But what I'm saying is your risk of having atrazine moving away or moving off target is almost zero at that point.
So here's kind of the point. Even though the label says one thing, we really disagree with it. We think it's dumb what the label says, but you know what? The label is the law, so we have to follow what the label says, so we can't spray atrazine in corn over 12 inches tall. I had a call just recently where a farmer said, well, to kill volunteer canola in my soybeans, I want to use Beyond. I said, well, you can't use Beyond. It's not labeled for soybeans. They said, well, isn't it exactly the same thing as Raptor? Yeah, it is. Exact same active ingredient, exact same use rate. Everything's exactly the same as Raptor. And they said, well, why can't I use Beyond then if it's exactly the same as Raptor? I said, because it's not labeled. So I don't care if it's exactly the same thing. You can't use it if it's not labeled.
Well, we run into this all the time. There's the same active ingredient that's used in multiple crops, but it may be in completely different products. Now, you don't know, for example, with Beyond and Raptor, maybe there's some inert ingredient in Beyond that could be a little bit hard on soybeans in particular, that where Raptor has the same active ingredient, but a completely different inert ingredient. You just don't know those things. And that's why you can't take those chances. Plus, it's against the law.
Yep, and here's the other thing. There are a lot of products that, let's say there's a rotational restriction of, well, I'll just give you the quick example. In, just a few years ago, Harness herbicide that we use in corn, you had to wait 18 months to plant sugar beets. And we said, well, why in the world would you have to wait 18 months? Because we know that Harness doesn't last in the soil more than a month or two. Okay, well, the whole reason why is because the chemical company had not done the residue studies needed in order to prove that there wasn't going to be residue left in this certain amount of time. And what it all comes down to with the chemical companies in a lot of situations, they say, well, there aren't that many acres that would go sugar beets anyway, so we're just not gonna spend the $250,000 to run the tests, or maybe $1 million to run the tests. When a lot of people like us as farmers, we look at these things, we say, well, why don't they just do this? Why don't they label it for this crop, or use it, have it for this other use, or have the rotational restriction 1 month instead of 18 months or something like that? It comes down to how much the chemical companies are willing to invest. And when they're already investing tens of millions of dollars to get products labeled, sometimes they just say, you know, let's just get the product out there, and in a few years, we'll spend another $1 million if we need to, if there's enough demand for it, and then get that label change.
Well, and you think about that, it's all to protect you. You can take some risk if you look at a label. There's been plenty of testing done where the EPA agrees with the chemical company that yes, it is safe to rotate to X crop in 3 months. Well, I can feel pretty confident that if I'm out there 6 months later after I use that chemical, I can rotate and the odds of me having a problem are very, very slim. But when I've got a crop that has not been tested, like let's just say Christmas trees, Brian. I mean, if you're a chemical company selling a corn herbicide, how many people are going to plant Christmas trees in that cornfield the next year? Probably not very many. So the chemical company's not going to do that research.
So what it comes down to here is we just encourage you to make sure you're following the label. If you want another reason why to do it other than just the fact that you're a good citizen when you do, if you get caught not following the label, the fines can be substantial. Like in our state, for example, the common number that's thrown around is $5,000 per incident. So the person that called me on that Beyond, if they wanted to go spray in their soybeans, let's say they did it in the state of South Dakota, they could literally face a fine of $5,000 per field they sprayed. Let's say they sprayed 10 fields, there goes 50 grand. And why? Why do you want to do something like that? Follow the label.
Well, you certainly want to pay close attention to the label if you have our Weed of the Week. Can you identify it?